Welcome back to the Faith Forward podcast. John Ackerman, and joined this week by my good friend Mike Haynes. Mike, thanks for being here.
Glad to be here.
Yeah. So this is the second to last week. Brian's not here, but I'm going to still say the word penultimate. Second to last week of this series on the fundamentals, the 7 spiritual rhythms that we've built everything around here at CFC when it comes to discipleship and spiritual living and life with God. So if you're just tuning in, you probably want to go back into the vault and check out the first 6 episodes of this series. The first week where we just laid out the fact that what we do matters, but how we do it matters more. Sort of this raft and rowboat and sailboat idea that we've been using as the literally vehicle for all of these messages. And then daily devotion, how we engage with God regularly, specifically through his revealed word, but not exclusively through his revealed word. The rhythm of prayer, that prayer with God is not just making our requests known to him, but it's conversation, it's communication, it's interactive, it's dynamic, it's personal. The rhythm of sacrificial generosity, that this is God's stuff and he invites us to be stewards. It's not our stuff that we give back to him. We talked about the rhythm of freedom from strongholds through repentance, and that it's not so much a problem of what we do, but it's what we think and believe deep within us that shapes what we do. And we're actually a little more in bondage than we realize. And that's something Jesus wants to talk to us about regularly, not just once or twice to clean up a few areas. Last week, Brian talked about serving the community and that we are called to serve, which I think most people know by this point if they've been around church for more than, 30 seconds. Yeah. But again, it's another place of recognizing what we do matters, but the way we do it, and as he talked about, where you do it matters, that we are called to love our neighbor, and our neighbor is anyone in the world, but it's also the places that God has placed you. That's not by accident. And so as we're bringing this around third and coming home, Mike, you're going to talk to us today. Well, we're going to talk today because it's Thursday. Yeah. We record this in advance. If that's news to you, I'm sorry to ruin the surprise. We don't stick around on Sunday after the service. We record this in advance, and so we're going to talk about what we probably talked about on Sunday. But we're going to talk about the rhythm of sharing your story. And I really love the message you put together for this Sunday. I hope it comes out more or less like you planned, unless it's somehow going to get better, which would be awesome. But we also recognize that you all sometimes access this days, weeks, months, maybe years, I don't know, after the Sunday message. So whenever it is that you access this, Mike, would you mind giving us a recap of what you probably said on Sunday about sharing your story?
Sure, yeah. What we talked about Sunday is basically the fact that we all have these uphill climbs that we're facing in life. You know, things are challenging, things are difficult, and one of the things that we end up doing, because other people's lives around us are difficult too, is many of us love to share our opinion. And there's nothing inherently wrong with sharing your opinion. When I say it that way, it sounds derogatory. That could have something to do with the tone of my voice. But, you know, we share our opinion. And so basically what we talked about on Sunday is that we are called to share our opinion. We are called to, as part of being in community with one another, is sharing your opinion. But one of the things that we noticed when we look at the life of the Apostle Paul is he did a whole lot of sharing his opinion with people, but it wasn't just sharing his opinion. Prior to that, he made sure to share his story of transformation. And I think that we are very much called to do the same thing, to share our story of transformation, and that in doing so, we provide context, and in some cases, like power for others when we then share our opinion on what they should or shouldn't do in life, or which direction they ought to maybe consider going in. And so that's what we talked about on Sunday, and it was a good time, and there's a lot more for us to discuss, which we'll get into now.
Yeah. And one of the things that I love about this message is how immediately practical it gets, which is always the goal of what we do here at Faith Forward, is how do I do whatever the thing is that we talked about on Sunday? And so that challenge, that overarching question that comes in the form of a challenge of, are you willing to share your story of how Jesus transformed you before you share your opinion? I mean, that's basically the podcast. I think we could hit stop on this at this point and just let you go on with your day and let that now simmer in the crock pot for the rest of, your life. And see what God does with that the vehicle of transformation in the lives of other people is our story of transformation, not just our opinion on what they should do. And that's really how we think about this rhythm of sharing your story. one of these 7 core fundamental spiritual rhythms, which again is not a box that we check. I've done it once or twice. I shared my story twice this month. I'm good now. It's the rhythm in which we live along with the other 6. And it's the sharing of your story of transformation to encourage others on their journey of transformation. That's the purpose of sharing your story. And I think there's times where, and you highlighted some of this probably on Sunday, that there's lots of reasons for us to share our story. Right? There's benefit of people recognizing I'm not the only one going through this, right? Because we've all got our uphill climbs, we've all got the things that are exploding or on fire all around us.
Yep.
And that can often feel very isolating and very lonely, like surely everyone else has their life put together.
Right.
And so just knowing you're not alone, knowing you're not the only one, is a super helpful reason to share your story with other people and to make space for them to share theirs. But I want to drill down to the essential nature of this rhythm, which is really this, that it's sharing your journey of transformation to help others in their journey of transformation. Mm-hmm. And this is what not only Paul seems to be laser focused on, but Jesus is laser focused on. God himself is laser focused on this. God himself writes a narrative of transformation. Yeah. Allows people to share in the experience of that transformational journey of God taking on human form and coming to earth and going, guys, here's the point. Here's what we're after. Now go tell that story, right? That's the command, is go share the good news. And the good news is a story, not principles.
Right.
And this is the life that we're called to, is to share a story of transformation for the purpose of being transformed. And I think one of the things, and Mike, you've been around church, despite the age difference between us, you've been around church a whole lot longer than I have.
Sure, that's fair.
And I think depending on how long we've been around church, there are some assumptions that we have about what sharing your story is supposed to look like or what sharing your story is supposed to accomplish. I'd imagine you probably have some stories about what it felt like to be told, you need to go share the story. You need to go share your story. What are some of the things that come to mind as you've sort of taken your own journey of thinking about this rhythm?
Yeah. So sharing story always, for me, growing up, had the context of sharing the gospel. And in a way, and we've said this several times, you are sharing the story of how Jesus has transformed you in order to tell the grander story of how God is transforming the world, right, through Christ. So it is, in a sense, sharing the gospel. However, part of the reason I think that many of us don't share our story is because maybe we feel very ill-equipped still to share the message of the gospel. We're worried we're going to trip up on our words, or maybe even when we share our story of how we came to faith in Jesus, we feel like it's not a good enough story. It's boring. I grew up in church, and one day, a worship song came on, and I felt something, and then I decided to pray the prayer, and then I prayed the prayer 3 years later. And then I prayed it again 3 years later after that, right? And if you grew up in church, you might be familiar with that kind of story. And so if you feel like you have a boring story of coming to faith in Jesus, and it doesn't involve, all the extremes of the human experience, then it feels like, well, my story isn't worth sharing, and so I'm not going to share it. And so for me, what's been a really neat journey is getting to the point where I recognize that, like, the transformation that we experience in Christ is not solely limited to the moment of our conversion, but that the goal of God in Christ is to continue transforming us over the course of our entire lives, which means that, sure, there may be an initial conversion story that you want to share, maybe, but for some of us, the coolest thing that you could share, not that the goal is to be cool, but the coolest thing that you could share has very little to do with how you came to Christ, and very much so to do with how your relationship with Jesus has affected your broken relationship with your sibling, right? Yeah. Or how your relationship with Jesus transformed your heart when it came to your finances, and right, and that stuff is not salvation type stuff, but it's sanctification stuff. It's becoming more like Jesus stuff. And so I think it is important that we define those terms and go, listen, if you've always thought that sharing your story is just about sharing how you came to faith in the first place, that's fine. That is a story, and it's a good one to share. But what might be even more helpful for someone, whether they're inside or outside of the faith, is if you share the story of how God has worked in your life, even beyond the initial point of conversion. And I think that's kind of what helps us to shape that up a little bit better.
Yeah. I would encourage you to maybe replay this back a couple minutes and catch that again, because I don't know that I've ever heard anybody say it that way before, that the expansion of what it looks like to share your story beyond a story, beyond the story of initial conversion, to all of the stories that you acquire over the course of your life with Jesus, how it shapes your relationship with your sibling, with your parents, with your spouse, with your neighbors, with your friends, with your coworkers, with yourself, your hobbies, your interests, your fears, your insecurities. There should be a growing mountain of stories of transformation because of your relationship with Jesus. And so you're right, this isn't just the retelling of a fixed moment in time. This is the telling of all of the stories from before that moment until today, because all of those stories have value. And so I think that for some of us, that may take the pressure off of, you better get that story down and get it tight and get it powerful, maybe throw some scripture verses in there, and then make sure it's like under 3 minutes, and make sure you could do it while you're standing in line at Starbucks without getting weird looks, but make sure people hear. Like, this is so much bigger than that. It's not that it's not that. It's just so much bigger than that. You have a lot of stories to tell, and I hope you're realizing that even as we kick this off. And that may be the second most practical thing that we do in this episode, is just help you to realize, expand this out, open the aperture, as Brian said last Sunday. You have a lot of stories to tell, and you get to have a lot of stories to tell. Yeah.
And the reason that this is going to be really helpful too, not only to you, but to everyone around you, is that ultimately, especially if we think about this evangelistically, like those who are not following Jesus, their reason for not following Jesus probably isn't related to heaven or hell. Probably. I mean, there are definitely, for some, it might be that they've never heard the message of the gospel and they've never heard about heaven and hell before. But like living in a relatively Christianized society, you know, it's probable that the folks who have chosen not to follow Jesus to this point in their life, they've heard about the prospects of heaven or hell. They might not totally understand how it works, all that kind of stuff. So the gospel message is still extraordinarily helpful. Don't get me wrong. But for many, the reason that they have chosen not to follow Jesus is because they don't think it would help them here and now. And getting to go to heaven when you die is, of course, an unbelievable reward, and it is worth celebrating and finding joy over. And there are some who, for them, that image of perfection someday in eternity is the most compelling reason to follow Jesus. But for many of us here experiencing this moment right now in this church, and then also those you know, the most compelling reason to follow Jesus may have very little to do with eternity and everything to do with how is it going to make my life better or make me better at life right here, right now. And so when you share the story of how God or how Christ has been working in your life in the very tactile things that every human being experiences, to some extent, that is every bit as powerful a form of sharing the gospel as walking through Romans Road with somebody, right? Because it is helping people understand. You've probably heard about Jesus dying on the cross for your sins. You probably heard that before. Let me tell you though why following Jesus has been transformative for me, right? And in doing that, you end up telling in a far more, I won't say a more compelling way, but in an additionally compelling way, the story of God at work through Christ and the gospel, the bigger story, just by telling your little intersection of that.
Yeah. So just to sort of wrap this up, because again, recognizing we come from different backgrounds, we come from different places of learning Your story is not about efficiency. It's not about getting this tight delivery, replicable so that you can deliver it the same way every time, every place to anyone. And it's honestly also not about outcomes. It's not about closing the deal. It's about establishing connections, creating relationships, and it's about transformation. Right? Jesus himself says this, Gospel of John, chapter 6, verse 44, that no one can come to me unless the Father who sent me draws them. Right? So the only way conversion happens is if God draws them. Right? So you're not on the hook for closing the deal. Do we play a part? Yes. That's the beautiful mystery of God, that he could do everything on his own, but he chooses to do it through us. But it's also not all up to us because we can't do anything without him. So you have a role to play. Your story matters. Your story matters, and it's not all up to you. And so this is not about efficiency of telling your story. This is not about perfection of telling a story again and again and again until it's locked in. This is about connecting with real people as a real person and sharing the story of what God has done. I mean, this is the beauty of what Jesus does to people who then go and share stories. Right? The woman at the well, Jesus has this amazing encounter. They don't really talk about heaven.
Yeah.
And they don't really talk about hell.
Yeah.
But he talks to her about her life in a way that brings about transformation in a moment. And she runs off and tells the whole town.
Yeah. Without even having the full story yet.
Right. Right. That's the beauty and the mystery of this. But she establishes connection with people she's connected to, and she establishes new connection around this issue of transformation. Come and see the one who told me everything about my life. Right? The people that Jesus touched that suddenly could see when they couldn't see, or walk when they couldn't walk, or hear when they couldn't hear. And that's the story they run off and tell. Mm-hmm. They don't run off and tell, a theological treatise on heaven and hell. But they go and share a story of transformation and establish connection with those who are looking for it. That's the invitation. That's the invitation for you. It's the invitation for me. Go share your story, all of the stories. Yeah. And that brings us to a place where we again need to widen the aperture on this. That the rhythm of sharing your story, if you've ever been through our orientation class that we have called Square One. It's not just for people that are new to the church, but if you're new to the church, it's a great starting point. But if you've been in the church 10 years like I had before you decide, maybe it's time I get serious about this thing, it's a great starting point for everything. Getting to know the church, getting to know these 7 rhythms, getting to know your gifting and your wiring, and getting to know about sharing your story. The thing that we talk about with sharing your story in that space is it's actually twofold. There is the going out and sharing the story, evangelism. Mm-hmm. But sharing your story also means inviting people into your story. It's the idea of not only of transformational evangelism, but transformational community. That your story is meant to be shared and your story is actually meant to be witnessed as well. You are meant to have people be a part of your life, not just the focal point of your life. And so when you think about sharing your story, and Mike, as you've thought about sharing your story and having people be a part of your story, how has that shifted? Because it sounds like you said early on the focus was you got to go tell people the gospel, and that's about the extent of it. How has your understanding of this broadened over the course of your life about there is a story to tell, but I need people in my story?
Yeah, and this is a helpful question for me to reflect on, because my natural born, like the way that I naturally operate in my in disordered sense of being, is definitely like a lone wolf. Like my natural state is like very much a lone wolf, and so it was easy for me for a very long time to operate. Had friends, even had community, right? But very much operate functionally as a lone wolf, at least in my at the core belief level, even if not at the lifestyle level, at the core belief level. And so in particular, over I would say the last probably 7 7, maybe 8 years or so, I've really started to see the value in bringing people into my story at the deepest possible level. And what I've discovered is that sharing my story with folks who can be of both social and spiritual significance to me has not just been helpful for them, which is what we've kind of focused a lot on in our conversation so far, but being willing to share my story at the deepest level, not hiding parts of who I am, but just going, no, this is for real. This is me. Even the stuff that's like ugly that you don't really want anyone to know, right? Like being willing to like share that with a couple of folks has been for me probably the be behind. I'm going to give all glory to God. Like first and foremost, right behind that, probably in conjunction with, has just been the lagging effects of sharing my story with people, because then they're able to speak into my life at a level that I wasn't able to be spoken into before. And so it was just me and the Holy Spirit working through that before. And while just you and the Holy Spirit is enough, you can also lie to yourself all the time. But like when you have people in your life who know you at your core, like, and love you enough to not lie to you, sometimes they'll tell you something true that you needed to hear that you wouldn't have told yourself because you're not kind enough to yourself to tell yourself the truth. Or if you think about it a different way, you're too kind to yourself. And so you'd rather just lie to yourself about that thing. Anyway, it has been extraordinarily helpful for me over the last 7 or 8 years to learn how to share, again, not with everybody, not with the whole church, not with everybody out in the community, but with have a handful of people in my life who know me at my core, because I have shared the fullness of my story and my sense of belief in being with them. That has helped me to be more transformed, which then of course leads to a better ability, or like more another rock on the mountain to draw from when I then share pieces of my story with others for their benefit, because I've experienced transformation at a deeper level due to community. So yeah, I mean, it's been super cool. Like, it's been super cool for a lone wolf to see like the benefit of finding a pack. Like, it's been pretty cool. So
yeah. And so don't miss that, right? The rhythm of sharing your story is not the call for all of us to go live the lone wolf life, affecting individuals as we go, making sure that they've heard the factual account of the life of Jesus and the transformational ability of eternity with him. It's that this is actually the primary vehicle that God seems to use for our transformation.
Yeah.
Right. And you referenced a lot of Galatians in this message, and that seems to be Paul's journey as well. Mm-hmm. That, I mean, part of Paul's story seems to be classic lone wolf style.
Yep.
I mean, dude's out in the desert by himself for a good long while.
Yep. And
yet God calls him into community. In fact, with a few folks that he's with for a good portion of his adult life.
Yep.
But also, and I think we sometimes forget the pace of travel then relative to the ease of travel now. Mm-hmm. Like, we think about Paul as like this jet-setting apostle and evangelist. Like, dudes in Philly on Monday and San Francisco on Wednesday just popping up churches.
Right.
And that's not actually how he lived his life.
Right.
He lived his life in months and years in a place at a time, establishing connection, knowing and being known. And you brought this out in the letter that he writes to the church in Galatia, that he starts off by sharing his story as not only introduction to, but transparency of, here's who I was and here's who I am now.
Yep.
Full disclosure.
Yep.
And this is why I'm asking for the opportunity to speak into your life. Yep. Not just because I know stuff, but because I've lived stuff and I've lived it with people.
Yep.
And I've seen how this works. And so that's part of the invitation for us, is one, to recognize you have a lot of stories to tell, not just one. And that the purpose of sharing your story is not to nail the delivery on a particular one, but to become more and more comfortable at sharing all of the places in your life that God has been transforming and is transforming, and you hope still will transform this side of eternity. But to do it in a way that not only helps like the one-offs, that you may or may not ever encounter again, but that you do it with those that you are willing to walk alongside, to do life with, the phrase that we love using in church, but to seriously do life with people and allow those stories to be formed in the closeness rather than have stories in isolation. Honestly, that's one of the true things about stories. The best stories are stories that have been shared, right? It's a lame story when you go do something by yourself and you finish with, well, I guess you just had to be there. And everybody else is like, well, I guess we did because, right? Versus the stories that you get to tell because you all did it.
Yep. And
now you're reliving it to get, that's the life that you're called to.
Yep.
So, how do you do that? How do you live your story with other people so that the stories you have to share continue to increase, not only in number, but in power? Well, again, in our orientation class, Square One, there's a couple things that we talk about on this particular rhythm. We talk about the fact that it's not only transformational evangelism, but it's also transformational community. To make both of those things possible, there's some things that we have to cultivate. And so, Mike, I'd love for you to sort of just reflect on, again, what your journey has looked like, what your transformation has looked like as you've had to enter into some of these. One of the first things that we have to do is learn to be authentic. And what that means is that many of us have learned to be a version of ourselves in different environments because that version of us works there. Right? Either head down, super serious, I'm the guy that gets stuff done, but don't ask me to tell a joke because I'm not funny here. I'm the guy that gets stuff done. Or I'm the guy with all the jokes and don't ask me to get stuff done because that's not my role here. My role is, captain of morale. Or whatever the thing is, right? You've figured out a way that you get what you need or avoid what you're trying to avoid in different parts of your life. And yet that's not what we see in the life of Jesus. Jesus is authentically himself. He's an authentically emotional being. He's an authentically serious being. He's an authentically fun. Dude's funny.
Yeah.
If you don't know Jesus is funny, go back and reread the Gospels. Yeah. Dude's funny. But he is himself everywhere he goes. And so if we want to be able to share our stories in a way that transforms the lives of others, and if we want to be a part of the lives of others and have them be a part of our life, one of the first things we have to do is learn to be authentic.
Yep.
What's that journey look like for you?
Yeah. That journey toward authenticity has been a challenging one for me. If you're an Enneagram person, I'm an Enneagram 3, which is, performer, basically. Someone who wants to, there's an inner drive to look a certain way, present a certain way, professional, perfect or whatever it is. And so, that being my kind of natural bent, man, it can be really difficult to be authentic because there's an inner dialogue in my head at most times, or at least there was certainly a much stronger one a few years ago. That was, what do they think of me? How am I coming off? Those kinds of things. I think, and this is not prescriptive, but in a way it is. In a way it is. This is just my story, but my story is that some of that stuff, not being authentic, some of that stuff had to just kind of get beaten out of me through suffering a little bit. And that's not really what anyone wants to hear.
This is where we take an optimistic turn in the episode.
Yeah. That's not really what anyone wants to hear, but it is true that God is kind enough to, he speaks, right? He speaks, he instructs, he prods, his spirit prods in our hearts for us to, make some shifts and become more like Jesus. And then there are also times, whether it's because the other measures didn't work or just because this was always plan A, and sometimes suffering is plan A. It was with Jesus. We don't like to think that way, but Jesus suffering on the cross is plan A. Anyways, so what in my life, the difficulties that me and my family have gone through over the last few years, if you've been if you've been around when I've preached any time over the last couple of years, you've probably heard bits and pieces of that story. Those difficulties have really ironed out some things that needed to be ironed out in me. And one of those things is this desire to make everybody happy, the desire to be seen a certain way. So some of that stuff, being inauthentic, some of that stuff really is a sign of, or rather it can be a sign of privilege, not in like a super loaded political sense, but just when life is relatively good, you have the time and energy to worry about how you're being perceived by others. But when your back is really against the wall and you're really up against it, I think that is where for many of us it becomes significantly easier to be genuinely authentic with everyone around us, because we just don't have the energy for anything else. Yeah. And then my story has been coming to discover that actually, even when someday I do have the energy, I don't know that I want to go back, because I've just found it to be significantly more freeing to just be the person that God has created me to be, fully, in as much as I can, fully in all places where God has me, and then just trust him with the results of that, recognizing that there will be people who don't like me, there will be people who think something of me that isn't true, or that, maybe there will be a time where I come off and the way that I come off is not the way that I intended, right? Yeah. Which we talked a little bit about in the message even, right? And just kind of going, I'm going to have to lay that at the foot of the cross, because in every moment I'm just choosing to be authentically who God has made me to be, which, by the way, if I can make a little tangent, because I want to make sure I'm not misunderstood here. Like, I don't want you to hear what I'm not saying. I'm not saying that I'm choosing to do whatever I want, right, whenever I want, yep, and consequences be damned. That's not what I'm saying, right? Like to some extent, like, be kind. Don't being authentically yourself does not mean like just if you're feeling mean, be a jerk, right? Like, but just choosing to live authentically. And what I've discovered is that when I do that, more opportunities to share pieces of my story come up, and then God to me, it seems as though I see more evidence of God being at work around me and through me, because I am more open to the opportunities he's laying at my feet, because I'm being more authentic. So that's what it's looked like in my story.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I love that you clarified that your authentic self is not just the self that you are when it's convenient, right, and you decided you can stop caring and act like an 80-year-old when you're 30. That's not authenticity. Authenticity is living out, discovering your truest self. One of the clearest places I see this is Judges chapter 6, the story of Gideon. Gideon's hiding in a hole in the ground because his country's overrun by enemies, and he's terrified and doesn't want anybody to steal his lunch. And an angel of the Lord, Jesus, in the Old Testament, shows up and introduces Gideon to himself by saying, "Mighty man of valor, the Lord is with you." And Gideon's response is authentic, but it's authentically incorrect, because Gideon's response is, you got the wrong dude in the wrong hole. I am the least in my family is the least in the clan, my clan is the least in the tribe. I'm nothing and no one. And by the way, you're saying that God is with me? God's abandoned us. If he hasn't, then why is our country overrun? And where are all the miracles that we were told used to happen when God used to be around? Yep. Right? That is an authentic response born out of pain. Mm-hmm. That is not who he authentically is, because Jesus just showed up and told him who he authentically is. Yep. And Gideon's about to take a journey of transformation with Jesus to discover his authentic self. And so when we talk about authenticity, I'm glad you highlighted that. That's what we're talking about. It's not the you that you're being when you don't care. It's the truest version of yourself when you decide to stop hiding in all of the ways that you used to hide, in a hole or not in a hole. Yep. And, I had a joke about the Enneagram, and I just couldn't get the bat off my shoulder. Something about it, like I'm an Enneagram 12, right? Because that's a number in the Enneagram, right? It's based on the 12 tribes, and I don't know the Enneagram. Yeah. Like I'm a 6, and I don't know what that means. Something about a lion. I don't know. But anyway, we digress, because that's not authentic. So authenticity, honestly, is just step one. And again, Mike, a lot of what you were calling out in the Sunday message was sharing our story, not just sharing our opinion. And we're so often so much more comfortable sharing our opinion without bringing ourself. Like, let me just tell you what you should do. And you talked about even the way that Paul does it, where Paul doesn't just share his story. And this gets us to the second thing. Paul isn't just authentic. Paul is himself. I mean, he opens Galatians with a very authentic statement. This letter is from Paul an apostle. I was not appointed by any group of people or any human authority, but by Jesus Christ himself and by God the Father who raised Jesus from the dead. This is me. And depending on what you're used to, that may sound like a pretty audacious, a pretty prideful introduction, but Paul's pretty much done pretending. He's like, this is me. I'm not looking for approval, and I'm not looking to pound you into the dust with my nameplate, but I need you to know this is me. But what he then proceeds to do in other parts of the first chapter of Galatians is he talks about where he got it wrong before he got it right, and then before he starts telling them what they should do to get it right. And I feel like that, not just authenticity, but vulnerability is something that I was noticing in your message of calling out of, if we just try to make it look like we've always had our act together, or if we try to act like we even have our act together, which we don't, spoiler, we're not only disingenuous, but we're going to miss out on a lot of the transformational power of sharing our story. Vulnerability actually has power. And you see that with Paul. Paul sharing, look, I used to be a Pharisee of Pharisees. I was the one persecuting people like you. Right? That was me. I was the guy who followed the law to the letter, and I had it all wrong. I had it so wrong. Jesus had to knock me flat on the road and take away my sight in order to help me see. That's how wrong I was, and that's why I can tell you what I can tell you now. Because I didn't live this perfectly. I needed help. I needed to be transformed, and that's what I'm offering you. His willingness to be vulnerable is profound. What have you seen as you've had to navigate not just authenticity, but vulnerability?
Well, vulnerability is genuinely terrifying for all of us. And if you have any position of authority, then you appreciate that the more the higher a pedestal that you are on, or that you think you're on with the audience you're being vulnerable with, the more terrifying that vulnerability is. I would imagine that this is perhaps a little bit of the reason why, you don't see Paul anywhere in the New Testament, in his New Testament letters. You don't see him talking a whole lot to these, city churches, and just like laying out all of his current sin issues, right? Because to some extent, their vulnerability is good, and also having the right audience to be vulnerable with is important. And so, but you do see Paul very much talking about areas where he has gotten it wrong previously. For me, being vulnerable as a pastor is terrifying. Being vulnerable as a youth pastor is terrifying because there are folks who there are at least one or two tiny humans in our church, and by tiny humans I mean under the age of 18, who probably do believe that I don't sin, and they're wrong, and I know they're wrong. And so anytime where I have an opportunity to be vulnerable, to share a piece of my story, it is scary to put yourself out there and to go, no, I'm not perfect. I don't have it all figured out, as you just said. My story has been that over the last few years, I've made an intentional decision to be very vulnerable with some of the pain that I've been going through, that my family's been going through from the main stage of our church. That was an intentional decision that I made very early on after the initial difficulty and the initial event happened. I decided almost immediately that I was going to, and this is something that I would encourage others to steal. I decided immediately I was going to weaponize my suffering. It was good. I just decided the enemy has made a mistake. Because I'm going to weaponize this for the benefit of God's kingdom. And so for me, that's been difficult, and it's been scary. There are a couple of things that have happened as a result of me being vulnerable. Number one, being vulnerable about the difficult things that I'm going through and my inadequacies in the midst of those difficult things. Being vulnerable about that in front of others has opened up opportunities for me to grow in other areas where I had inadequacies that I hadn't even fully realized yet. One of those areas has been like with regard to this lone wolf thing that I've kind of, right? Like, I don't need you. I don't need a tribe. I don't need people to help. Right? Like, and so God has just kind of helped me to work on that over the years. And it's because I was willing to be vulnerable about where I was really at and what I was really feeling, even while pointing people ultimately to Jesus. The second thing that's happened as a result of me being vulnerable is I think other people have felt like I've watched people come up to me after a service where I've been vulnerable, whether it's in student ministry or downstairs in main stage. And I've watched people come up to me afterward and I can see them breathe a little easier, not because anything has changed about their circumstances, but simply because they know that they're not in it alone, which you alluded to earlier. And so it's been really, I don't like to use the word, but it's been a blessing. It's really the only word to use. It's been such a blessing for me to be able to see that my story, which is currently still in the middle of, and it's not have a bow on it by any stretch, has been helpful to others as they go through their difficult things. And then the third thing and this has been for me, is that as I've shared my story and been vulnerable about where I'm at, what my inadequacies are, where I feel like I might be falling short in this moment, but trusting that the Lord will provide. The other thing that has happened is that as other people have shared their stories in return of what they're going through, and they've been vulnerable with me, it has given me perspective that has then allowed me to resolved my strength in the midst of my circumstance. Because when other people tell me what they're going through right now, I share what I'm going through and they tell me what they're going through, it is often the case that I then go, internally, I might not say it to their face, but internally, I kind of go, at least I don't have to deal with that, right? Like there's something, and they feel the same way about my story. There's something about this perspective that you get when you're willing to be vulnerable with other people, wherein they're vulnerable back, and you start to realize like God has actually equipped you to navigate the difficulties you're navigating. And in the imperfections that you have, he has equipped you to work through those imperfections with him. Whereas when other people share about the imperfections they have or the difficulties they're going through, you kind of feel the stress and the overwhelm of their stuff because it's unfamiliar. So I think those are three things that have happened as a result of me being vulnerable, being willing to be vulnerable the last few years. And I've just found that while I have to be careful about the audience, and I'm always a little fearful of judgment. I think that's just a normal human emotion. I've just discovered that the benefit far outweigh the risks. At least that's been my story to this point so far. So 10 out of 10 would highly recommend.
Well, and I really appreciate you clarifying the part about vulnerability requiring the right audience, because again, that's not so much about safety and protection so that not everybody hears about my stuff, but it's more the reality that vulnerability requires reciprocation for you to truly experience connection, transformational community, things like this. Mm-hmm. And so, you have a unique position where you stand up on a platform every Sunday, whether it's with, little people, teenagers, mm-hmm. or adults, and you share your life in a room where they cannot share their life back.
Yeah, right.
And yet the invitation is, well, be vulnerable, Mike, so that we can feel connected to you.
Yeah.
And so there has to be a limit placed on your vulnerability in a public setting because you're not receiving vulnerability back. Right. But when we talk about community, vulnerability has to be reciprocated in order for there to truly be vulnerability. I mean, if I'm sharing the depths of my life and the people around me are going, that's cool. I think that's all the time we have for tonight. Right? That you're not going to find transformational community there because you are sharing your story, but their story is not being shared with you. Yeah. And so authenticity, you can be authentic everywhere you go. You can be yourself everywhere. But vulnerability has to have reciprocation. You sharing your story with people who are sharing their story with you, if you truly want to find community. And that also, honestly, that plays itself out more often than not if we're talking about transformational evangelism. You going out and doing a drive-through sharing of your story and mm-hmm. then peeling away to never see that person again mm-hmm. may have an effect.
Sure.
God does amazing things with people in short bursts. Philip and the Ethiopian eunuch.
Sure.
Dude's there for 4.5 minutes and a life has changed, and then he's whisked away. We don't know how.
Yep.
But in most cases, God seems to call people not to drive-throughs, but to sit-down restaurants, to use a metaphor here that I'm making up as we go.
Love it.
Right? The invitation is connect with people, to be intimately connected with people, to share your story and allow their story to be shared. That's what the early church was all about, right? That's what an Acts church model was all about, was be in connection and community with each other, and that requires vulnerability. But the last thing it requires is transparency. And Mike, you and I were in a group for a while as part of that 7 to 8 year transformational process you were describing. And one of the things that we did when we launched that group was every guy took a night and told his story in full, which for most people, it's like, oh, you got like 15 or 20 minutes. No, we went over the top. We did 2.5 to 3 hours. And there's very little hiding that you can do in 3 hours when you are the focus and you are sharing your story. I mean, there's some stuff you can sort of sneak into a corner that maybe folks might not notice, but by and large, everything's coming out. Yep. And that goes well beyond vulnerability at that point, because that takes you to a place where you're being seen, even if you're trying hard not to be seen.
Yep.
And that's honestly the final stop on this journey to sharing your story with others, is that you are fully seen and fully known.
Yep.
That vulnerability is progress along the journey. I share a little bit of this and I share a little bit of that, and you share a little bit of this and a little bit of that. But the goal is being fully seen. This is actually the experience that Peter, James, and John have with Jesus on a mountainside when Jesus is transfigured. That this man that they followed for almost 3 years at this point is suddenly transformed before their eyes into his truest self. That's what the white light is about. It's not like suddenly there's a light show and that's cool and then the lights go off. It's Jesus is truly revealed as he is in all his glory, and all Peter can do is run at the mouth and talk about putting up tents. Yep. Because he's so overwhelmed by the awesomeness of who he is finally seeing.
Yep.
And that's the invitation for all of us, is to get to a place where not only are we most comfortable sharing the parts of our life that are uncomfortable, but we are seen by those around us because we are known. And when we start to live that way, the way that we share our story with others becomes powerfully transformational, because we're not trying to sell them something. We're not trying to pitch them on an idea. We are being our transparent self. We are being vulnerable. We are being authentic, and they are witnessing the power of God's work in our life, and it's overwhelming.
Yep.
That sells itself.
Yep.
And it forms a connection, because the number of times that people encountered Jesus and they went, I want to know that guy. Not just, I want to buy the merch. I want to go where he's going because there's something about him I want to be close to.
Yep.
That's the ultimate end product of sharing your story, is it's not just conversion. It's connection. It's relationship. Mike, you talked at the end of the message about some things that get in our way of truly experiencing what we just described. You talked about shame and unforgiveness. You talked about feelings of insignificance. You talked about fear of rejection. Do you want to highlight any of that here in terms of like practical, how do I recognize it? How do I deal with it?
Yeah. I think we talked about this earlier. You mentioned, Paul's ability to just go, this is who I am. And the claims are really bold. And the reason that rubs some of us the wrong way when we see it in other people, or the reason it rubs us the wrong way when we're faced with the prospect of doing that ourselves, just going, this is who I am and this is what God has called me to. This is the role, right, that God has called me to. This is what I'm meant to do and meant to be. The reason that we bristle against that, I think, is because of that second one, that insignificance. Which I think it at a deeper level comes from a place of false humility, right? Or maybe it's a level above insignificance is a false humility, but just this idea that we're hiding because we're afraid to be who it is that God has called us to be. And so we hide. And so And so it's just easier in some sense to just blend into the crowd, be part of the shadows, just kind of blend in and be insignificant. And I would just encourage us. This is something that the reason that I'm pretty passionate about this is because this has been a big piece of my story over the last few years, is just coming to a place where you stop. It's like there's something inside of you that just like you can, and if you felt this before, you know what I'm talking about. There's something inside of you that just like wants to come out. Just like let it. Just like the thing that God is like telling you to like go do this or be this person, or this is like what you're meant to be. You have this vision of yourself that you know is not from you. It's like from the Lord. Like this is what, and it's not a certain context. It might not be a certain job. It might have nothing to do with that. But it's just there is a full like vision of who it is that God has made you to be, and you kind of shrink away from that and go, who am I to pursue that? Who am I to say that that's who God has made me to be? I'm just an ant. I'm one of 7 billion people, right? And so, and I just think that I've gotten to the place where I recognize that just stepping into the fullness of that, even as scary as it is, and you might fall short of your vision. And what if it takes longer than you think it's going to, or what if you do it imperfectly and people, are like, man, you're so full of yourself. Like, but just go for it, do it, and then share the story of what God is doing in you as you step into that. And I've just learned that that's so much better. So I think shame and unforgiveness and fear of rejection and even kind of the kind of other side of false humility, which is false confidence, which is, that's like what Saul had, before he became Paul, right? He just like crazy confident, to like at an unhealthy level, like just like a little bit of an ego actually. And so like, I think that all of those things are such real and visceral and relevant reasons why we don't share our story. But for me in this season of my life, the one that stands out to me the most is that insignificance. And so if that's your story, like that's your piece of who you are right now, it's just not feeling like you're worthy, or not feeling like who are you to have a story to tell that could help somebody else. Like my encouragement to you is just like stop hiding. Like that hiding in the shadows is every bit as sinful. This is harsh. Hiding in the shadows is every bit as sinful as like trying to step falsely onto the pedestal and elevate yourself more than you. Like it doesn't feel as sinful because it feels like humility, but it's not. Like it's every bit the same level of disobedience. And so and so I don't say that to shame you at all. I just say to exhort you, like if you feel that God is calling you to become a certain person, to like there's again this vision of who you're meant to be, just like step into that, because like it's worth it. Like it's worth the risk of doing that. So yeah, that's the one that stands out to me the most for sure.
Yeah. Again, you may need to rewind that and listen to that again. That was good. And none of this is meant to diminish the benefit that can come from learning to tell your story in succinct ways. None of this is meant to diminish the value in thinking through your story to decide which parts may be most helpful to people.
Sure.
Right? That there is the art and the science to sharing your story in ways that can truly maximize the impact on the people around you. But if we focus on that and we miss discovering the truth of who you are, coming to terms with your own story, becoming comfortable and confident with who you authentically are, learning to be vulnerable appropriately in public places and maybe uncomfortably so in the places where you truly cultivate community, to the point that you become your transparent self.
Yep.
That is the most effective way to become someone whose story, when it is shared, sparks transformation in the lives of others, whether it's people that you've been walking with for a while or people that you met in the drive-thru. And so as always, the invitation is to sit with whatever we shared here and invite God into that and ask him where he's directing you. What is he wanting you to notice about your story that maybe you've never looked at it quite that way before? Mm-hmm. What is it, as you pointed out a few times on Sunday, what is he wanting you to maybe do differently when it comes to sharing your opinion versus sharing your story?
Yep.
Or maybe just sharing your story before you share your opinion, which again means you have to come to terms with your story. You have to spend some time in your story, not just in the answers that you think could quickly make a difference in someone else's life. That's not what we're about here, honestly. We could probably have made a 15-minute podcast on 10 ways that you can more effectively tell your story.
Totally.
But that's honestly not authentic.
Yep.
And it's not going to bring about the kind of transformation that God can bring about through us when we're willing to let him in and we're willing to let people in to all the places in us that need access. So, as always, thank you first and foremost for letting us be on our own journey, because we are still walking. But thank you also for the privilege of letting us be a part of your journey, because it truly is a privilege for us to do that. And Mike, thank you for sharing your journey with all of us here and being a part of mine too. It's been good times, man.
Yeah, man.
So until next time, thanks for being a part of this Faith Forward community. We'll see you on the next episode.